When it comes to the Chinese Communist Party, the U.S. could be singing an alarming new tune. Oh, say can you CCP?
They're really savvy about how they moved into this country and infiltrated the agriculture sector.
China may very well hold your life in its hands.
The last time America made an antibiotic was 2004.
I called 70 different pharmacies. Everyone was like, nope.
How has our government allowed this to happen? When it comes to the Chinese Communist Party, the U.S. could be singing an alarming new tune. Oh, say can you CCP? We're in trouble. Tonight, we're breaking down China's disturbing purchase of U.S. land near key military installations, the CCP's quietly growing dominance over our agriculture and food supply chain, and the harassment of some American citizens on U.S. soil. How has our government allowed this to happen? Let me say that again. How has our government allowed this to happen? And here's something that should really give you pause. Did you know that more than 80% of the active pharmaceutical ingredients used in our medications are imported with a significant portion coming from China? That's a dependence that poses a serious risk to our health and national security. So tonight, to illustrate the gravity of the CCP's influence on the U.S., here are key interviews that you need to see. Let's start by looking at the impact on our food supply.
We consistently see that it's the Chinese government that poses the biggest long-term threat to our economic and national security.
The CCP has hacked into American critical infrastructure.
CCP hackers access computer systems of about 24 critical entities, including in Hawaii and in Guam. The hackers even attempted to access the Texas electric grid.
A Chinese surveillance balloon entered U.S. airspace and spent the next 8 days traveling over the majority of the continental United States.
Just across the Brooklyn Bridge, this nondescript office building has a dark secret. An entire floor hosted an undeclared police station of the Chinese National Police.
Imagine telecommunications going down so people can't use their cell phone. People start getting sick from polluted water. Trains get derailed. Air traffic control system, port control systems are malfunctioning. This is truly an everything, everywhere, all at once scenario.
We've become numb to it as a nation. It's estimated that 80% of American adults have had all of their private data stolen by the Communist Party of China.
If we do not address this threat, then the CCP will have the ability to turn off the lights for everyday Americans, shut down cities, and cause massive loss of American lives.
Now, I want to be perfectly clear here. I'm talking about the threat the Chinese government and the CCP pose to America. I am not talking about the Chinese people or Chinese Americans, for sure. The Chinese people oftentimes are the biggest targets and victims of China's authoritarian government and ruling party. Many believe our most fundamental freedoms as Americans are at stake here. Now, John says that his freedom and livelihood is at stake as a fourth-generation farmer in Virginia. He says he may lose everything because of the Chinese government. Take a look and you'll understand.
China's really quietly stealing the agriculture sector in the United States. Will we be able to stay on the land and continue to farm? Farmers depend on good farm ground to make it or break it. Before China started coming into this area, I could buy decent farm ground for $2,500 to $3,000 an acre. Now it's $15,000, $20,000. I simply can't compete with that. The land is everything to me. That's what my daddy told me growing up. This land is everything. My forefathers were slaves on the board plantation. After the Civil War, a lot of black families stayed on these plantations, and you either became two things, the sharecropper or the ability to purchase land. My great-grandfather bought 117 acres from the Boyd plantation, and I still have some of those original acres today. And now I'm faced with China coming into the area and taking those freedoms away by purchasing the land, by buying the companies. I'm really at their liberty. They're now controlling the buying stations, the grain elevators, and they're controlling the food. Stealing our seed technology. So this is our food security. This is national security. For me to lose the farm would be losing myself. This is who I am.
John, I have to first say that is an amazing story.
Thank you.
I mean, you talk about a family history and deciding to do what you wanted to do.
Yes, so my grandfather taught us how important land ownership was. Every step you take, every step you make requires land ownership, and never, never, never sell the farm. And that's when my father didn't sell it, and he passed it on to me. And hopefully, if I can hold on, I'll be able to pass those original acres on to my children as well.
And now that's being threatened.
That is correct. And now China's come in, Dr. Phil, buying land at these auctions and running land prices, through the roof. And people need to understand farmers need good farm ground in order to compete. Farmers rely on good farm ground to expand their farming operation so that they can increase their revenue. And when you have the opportunity, Dr. Phil, to buy adjoining land that joins your farm or in that surrounding area where you farm at, farmers try to jump on that opportunity.
Yeah.
So
you would have adjoining land that you could have purchased in the past for, say, $3,500 an acre. They're coming now paying $15,000, $20,000.
$20,000 an acre. And guess what that does to property taxes for a poor farming family that's barely holding on and paying your annual taxes? It runs the taxes through the roof. And what's troubling to me is the federal government isn't doing anything about it.
Now, when these auctions happen, who represents them at those auctions?
Sometimes, Dr. Phil, be the little white guy with the ball cap that's bidding for them. And they set up these dummy corporations and fractional corporations. And then when the deed is recorded, it's owned by China. They're really savvy about how they moved into this country and infiltrated the agriculture sector in the United States.
All right, so they buy up everything around you. Then you get all of this grain and you go sell it. And where you sell it is owned by who now?
It's owned by China, Smithfield Foods. And that's what people don't understand. They say, well, can't you just go sell somewhere else? Dr. Phil, farmers sell within 1 hour's driving distance to their farming operations. And I'm no different. It's about harvest time, time sensitive. You go out, you harvest, you get a truckload and you sell it, you come back and you repeat that process until you finish.
And so you can't expand your farm and you're selling to a Chinese buyer. If they decide to stop buying,
I'll be in trouble.
All right. Now we're going to talk to a woman who says she is being harassed, threatened, and intimidated right here on U.S. soil by the Chinese government. We're going to talk to her next. Hey everybody, Dr. Phil here. Could the U.S. dollar be on the precipice of collapse? 19% of Americans 65 and older are still working. That's double from 35 years ago. Some people say that's something our elected leaders should be fixing. So what do? Well, I can tell you what I'm doing. I'm turning to physical gold and silver, and I encourage you to do the same thing right now. Preserve Gold is the only company I trust and recommend to my own friends and family, and you can trust them too. Today, they're giving away a free precious metals guide that contains essential information on how to help protect your accounts. Just text Dr. Phil to 50505. As an exclusive offer for my friends, in addition to their free guide, you can also get up to $15,000 in free gold and silver with a qualified purchase. So don't wait. Text Dr. Phil, P-H-I-L, to 50505 to claim this exclusive offer from Preserve Gold today.
China's bought land right here to my left. They're buying companies like Smithfield Foods. And that blue truck and trailer is what I drive to Smithfield Foods to haul soybeans, corn, and wheat on, to sell to a company that's owned by China.
And this is a cry and plea to corporate America. It's a cry and plea to politicians to take action and put some laws in place to stop China from selling this stuff here that I'm standing on. Stop allowing them to buy precious soil.
The FBI estimates China steals $225 to $600 billion with a B dollars every year in trade secrets, counterfeit goods, and pirated software. Rashawn is an American citizen who was born in East Turkestan, a province of China. Her family was persecuted in their homeland. So, hoping for a better future here in the States, she moved here when she was 21 years old. But now, she's constantly looking over her shoulder, fearing for her safety. Here's why.
The Chinese Communist government is targeting my people and conducting full-fledged genocide. I am an Uyghur. My homeland was occupied in 1949 by the People's Republic of China. They're facing mass detention. Millions of people are in the concentration camps. I came to the United States in 1989. I was invited to speak at one of the think tanks in Washington, D.C. 6 days after that, my sister and my aunt both were taken on the same day. As a retaliation for my activism, they released my aunt several months later. But last 5 years, my sister's in jail right now. I am doing my advocacy at the cost of my sister's freedom. When I doubled down my efforts, the Chinese government published all kinds of false articles about me, saying that I was stealing other people's photo and claiming this is my missing relatives and spreading lies about China. The book, George Orwell's 1984, is nothing compared to the Chinese Communist Party QR scanning codes on every home, GPS tracking devices on every vehicle. They are expanding everywhere, including United States.
Now, Samuel is also joining us. He was born in Hong Kong, but has been a U.S. citizen for nearly 30 years. Hong Kong has been a part of China since 1987, and in 2020, Samuel became the first American on Hong Kong's most wanted list.
I might have started my life in the US under the fear of retaliation and persecution by the CCP, but because of the safe harbor I found here, I have grown to be a fugitive and a thorn in the side of the Communist Party in China. My personal work here in the US are being monitored and being surveilled constantly, but I do not feel and will not yield to that level of threat because it's a tactic that I think the Chinese government have used.
I ask you two to come together because both of you are U.S. citizens being targeted by the Chinese government. And what do you remember about the Chinese soldiers coming into your house?
My dad was taken away, then the soldiers came over to get my mom. She had me in her arm. They grabbed me so hard, so rudely, and they almost threw me over to my grandma's arm. And my mom and dad used to say that I cried so hard, she could hear me crying from miles and miles away for hours.
Now, you have spoken out since you've been here at some of the things that have been so upsetting to so many. And nearly 6 years ago, you were part of a panel in D.C., and it really changed your life because what happened a week after you were on that panel and spoke out?
My own sister and my aunt were taken away. They are 1,400 kilometers, which is more than 900 miles away from each other, but exactly the same day from two different parts. One is retired medical doctor. I always carry my sister's photo. That's her. And my aunt is a retired school teacher, and they both were taken away. I have not seen a proof of life, no video, no picture, no information.
6 days after you were on the panel?
Yes.
Now, Samuel, how did you find out you were on the most wanted list in China?
Well, I will always remember it was July 30th in 2020, and I was actually asleep in my apartment in Los Angeles, and I received a bunch of phone calls and text messages. And then I woke up the next morning and found myself a wanted fugitive. What happened was that the Chinese state media, televisions, have published a report that they have issued an arrest warrant for me, an American citizen on American soil, based on the national security law that has just been enacted in Hong Kong a month before. It's almost as if I got a knock on the door, but not by American law enforcement, not by anybody here that was authorized to be here, but from the Hong Kong and Chinese CCP law enforcement, all the way from Hong Kong and from China.
Okay. And both of you feel like you are surveilled here in the United States, correct?
Yes.
You think you're followed and monitored?
And being harassed verbally and attacked verbally.
Absolutely horrible. Look, when we come back, how American investors may be funding human rights abuses and the Chinese Communist Party. That's next. I am not a financial expert. I am not an expert on geopolitics and certainly not on geoeconomics. But I've got a really good friend who damn sure is, and his name is Kyle Bass. He is the founder and chief investment officer of Heyman Capital Management. He is a life member of the Council on Foreign Relations, and he has testified as an expert witness before Congress and has lectured on global economics, national security, geopolitics, and the architect of the Chinese financial system. He knows a thing or two about what we're talking about.
Pleasure to be here, Dr.
It's good to see you again.
Good to see you.
How's their economy doing right now?
I mean, I actually think it's the worst it's ever been. They have a youth unemployment crisis where the youth of China, they admitted 21% of the youth doesn't have a job. And some Chinese scholars say that's as high as 46% today. They have a real estate crisis where they let real estate grow unabated, and that was the Chinese miracle, growing their GDP through real estate. Now it's gone the other way. They've got a banking crisis, and they've got a local government finance crisis. All of those things are happening simultaneously as we sit here today.
Why are they stockpiling so much grain?
If you imported 40% of your food, and you were going to be thinking in the future about making a belligerent move with your military, you'd stockpile some food.
Are they getting ready for war?
I mean, my view is yes. My view is if you listen to Xi Jinping since 2017, not the media stories, go read his speeches. And if you read what he says, he's been telling you since 2017 that his life's goal, his life's mission is the reunification of the great Chinese race, which means reunifying Taiwan forcibly or peacefully, whichever one they'll go with.
Well, Dr. Phil, based on everything he's saying, why are we in the United States letting this continue for China to come and purchase land?
Well, they are purchasing a lot of land. And we've got a map here that shows counties in states with Chinese-owned land. A lot of this, sadly, is strategically purchased. Is that fair to say?
That's absolutely true.
And I want to take a look. In red is where they're making a lot of these purchases, and some of these are close to military installations. And that really concerns me. So we have some of these, like Dugway Proving Ground right here. Military equipment, biological, chemical weapons defense systems. These are strategically important to the United States, right? I mean, this is important stuff for our defense. And they're juxtaposed right next to it. That's not an accident, is it?
No.
Then you come over to the Missouri Air Force Base. You've got B-2 Spirit Stealth Bomber Base, missile and drone operations, MQ-9 Reaper, Global Strike Command, 3 intercontinental ballistic missile wings, Air Force entire bomber force, nuclear command control and communication system. And they bought land right next to it. And then you can come over here to the Virginia Naval Air Station and look at this. They're all right next to it. North Carolina airborne and special operations forces. They're strategically buying land around that. This is not random. We have a picture of you standing in front of a ranch that is really interesting. What's the name of the ranch?
The Morningstar Ranch.
Morningstar Ranch.
Yep. General Soon is one of the wealthiest people in the Communist Party. And somehow he used a front man in Lufkin and he acquired more than 100 square miles of land. This is his headquarters. And he filed permits to put up windmills. They want to put up windmills for two reasons. They want to connect directly to the US grid so that they can upload malware to the grid and they can monitor the grid. And they also want to build these windmills 700 feet tall. Imagine a windmill that's almost as tall as the Washington Monument. And they can put cameras up there that map the horizon, and they can map the horizon with 1 square inch of clarity right next to our largest Air Force military training base. Every Air Force pilot trains at Laughlin Air Force Base. They can map every person, every plane, every hypersonic that glides by. What it has to do is go through a process called CFIUS, the Committee on Foreign Investment in the US, which the US Treasury is in charge of. And DOD is a piece of it. State, there are all these different departments that are part of CFIUS, but the US Treasury runs it. Here's the problem. The US Treasury is owned by Wall Street. Mm-hmm. And Wall Street can't wait to invest another dollar in the land of 1.3 billion people of puppy dogs and rainbows and make some more money in China. So whenever anything really comes down to it, if Treasury's in charge, we're in real trouble. And so all of these deals that you're showing here, many of them have just walked through CFIUS. So that's the problem.
Dr. Phil, this is a national security threat to America. I mean, look at that map.
If this bothers y'all, raise your hand. Okay, I just want to know if you think we're sitting up here talking like crazy conspiracy theorists, or you think, no, this does not make common sense. Remember, we're talking about the Chinese Communist Party, not the Chinese people. Don't go blaming your neighbors for these distressing developments. They aren't responsible. A lot of Chinese Americans and a lot of Chinese migrants left to get away from the same people that we're talking about here. They left to get away from the Chinese Communist Party. They're not the problem. We're talking about the calculated maneuverings of the Chinese government, the CCP. Coming up next, does your life depend on a key medication? China may very well hold your life in its hands. The troubling state of our prescription medications.
The drug shortage in the United States has reached a 23-year high.
The FDA has not been an effective partner in combating drug shortages.
Data shows 323 medications in short supply across the country, the highest since tracking started in 2001.
Every year, there's more drug shortages to worry about.
FDA last testified that around 80% of API facilities and 60% of finished dosage facilities are overseas, including India and adversarial countries like China.
If something happens at those factories, there aren't many backup plans.
If adversarial countries were to cut off the supply, American patients' lives could hang in the balance.
Now, the U.S. Census Bureau reports more than 60 million Americans are going without the medications they need. Look at this list of prescription drugs on the FDA site. Over 100 medications you may need right now. But I want to give you something else to think about. The drug shortage isn't just putting Americans' health at risk, it's exposed a dangerous vulnerability in our national security. China and India are U.S.'s primary source for pharmaceutical ingredients and account for 91% of all prescriptions written in the United States. That means the drugs you get from your local pharmacy or hospital were probably made in China or some other country. Now, if China just decides to stop exporting drugs to America, it could upend the entire U.S. health system. Phil has been a pharmacist for 26 years. He says his business is suffering because of China, and so are his customers.
The drug shortage almost closed my business. Prices got so bad, availability was gone. I've watched my patients suffer. How do you tell them that their medication is not available? I find myself begging from other stores in order to get just enough to get somebody through. But there's a day coming where that's not possible. API, which is an active pharmaceutical ingredient, predominantly are made in China. There's one factory in China that produces 100 of the top 500 medications that the WHO has stated as being essential. When children's Tylenol and ibuprofen shortages happened, it was actually because the Chinese people needed the Tylenol and ibuprofen, and China gave those APIs to the Chinese people first. The strict regulations of the United States have pushed the hand of pharma to move outside the United States. The Chinese worker makes 47 cents an hour. The standard working situation inside of China doesn't require EPA standards. It doesn't have working conditions. There's no OSHA. How can the American factory, who we would love to have be making it, even start to compete with these people? Because we are so dependent on China for our drugs, this will end up being the perfect storm. It will become a bargaining chip. It will make us weak in the world. And they know that they have us because there's no place to get your generic APIs except from China.
Phil the pharmacist. You call yourself the MacGyver of medications. Why?
Because you have to take care of your patients. When the patient comes in, they need something, you have to figure out a way to get it for them.
So if you can't just give them the straight up prescription in capsule form or pill form or whatever, then you have to compound it. You go find the ingredients and you put it together so they can get it in some form.
Yeah, you don't want to have to do that. I mean, you don't get paid enough to do it. You call 6 different manufacturers, you go to every single secondary wholesaler, you do everything you can to get for them. But even then, we're failing. People are going without their medications.
Yeah. Okay, explain APIs.
So the API is the actual active ingredient. If you buy amoxicillin, there's amoxicillin and then there's other things in it. The amoxicillin, the actual active ingredient, is being produced majority in China and some in India.
I saw a statistic that said 97% of antibiotics are coming out of China.
So the last time America made an antibiotic was 2004.
Seriously? Now, we can't be that short-sighted. We know we have an adversarial relationship with China. So at any point, if they just said no more exporting to the US of these antibiotics, how long before we just run out?
A month.
Really?
Economic pressures have pushed on hospitals and pharmacies to a point where you keep maybe 3 days worth of medication in your store. After 3 days, you'd be dried up from what your normal patterns are.
If this is news to you, all raise your hand. Okay, that's what I thought. All right, when we come back, a young woman says she can't get the medicine she needs and it's damaged her career and her relationships. We'll be right back.
An emergency shortage of hundreds of prescription drugs. This happened in part because it's not that China is withholding supply, it's that they have a monopoly on a lot of the raw material.
If you think about the national security crisis that this could be, this is not just the poor chap who's developed prostate cancer. We're talking about not being able to supply medicines to our military, for example. Well, that's a big deal. Until somebody says, hey, listen, we're going to change this, I think we're in for a disaster.
Well, as you just heard from my friend Chris Como at News Nation, we're in the middle of a national drug shortage that shows no signs of improvement. 29-year-old Samantha says she's taken ADHD medication for the past 14 years, but when she found out the drug she relied on was no longer available, she says it turned her world upside down.
I struggle with ADHD, and this nationwide drug shortage is real. I started calling around to different pharmacies, and I kid you not, I called 70 different pharmacies in 1 week, and not a single pharmacy within a 2-hour driving vicinity that I called had Vyvanse in stock. I started driving to different local CVS, Walgreens, different mom and pop pharmacies just to figure out if maybe I'd have better luck in person. Not a single one had it in stock, and I even had a pharmacist say to me, well, why do you need it so bad? Anybody wanted to know what it looks like to move while you have ADHD when you don't have your medication? This is what it looks like. Boxes, piles everywhere that I can't make sense of. I am in the middle of moving right now and I'm so overwhelmed and I'm stuck in freeze mode because I'm overwhelmed. And I go to my medicine cabinet to go and get my Vyvanse, and lo and behold, I have 2 pills left right now and I wish I were kidding. I am totally not trying to sound like a drama queen right now, but this Vyvanse shortage is ruining my life.
Samantha, when you started trying to get the prescription refilled, and they said, hey, we don't have it. You started shopping. Right?
Absolutely.
And so pretty soon they started looking at you like, hey, lady, what are you doing here? They thought maybe you were misusing it.
Exactly. I felt like pharmacists were looking at me like I was, partaking in drug-seeking behavior. And it was very demeaning and very dehumanizing because I believe that this medication is something I need.
And you say it's affected your career, your relationships, because you're a different person with and without it.
Absolutely.
Listen, this is a neurological disorder. For those who actually need it, who have neurological dysregulation, it's a real problem. How do you change when you're not on it?
When I'm not on it, I feel chronically overwhelmed, and I feel like that has affected my home life, my relationships, my career. I am a business owner and an entrepreneur, and I work in weddings, I do makeup, and when you're dealing with people who are, about to have the most important day of their lives, you want to be, on your A game.
What's her alternative?
They'll probably try to change her medications to something else, but the one that she's on releases lower in the GI tract, so most people won't get that nervousness around it. It delays it a little bit. If I switched it to something else, most likely she'd be really jittery, and then she'd be a bear at the beginning of the wedding, and then she'd be fine, and then at the end of it would start wearing off, so each one of them have different time frames.
Vyvanse works incredibly for me.
It's been gone for 7 months.
It's crazy.
And then when it did come back, it went from being $138 a bottle, it cost me now $500 a bottle for the generic.
Yeah.
For the generic?
For the generic. So that means on average, on my Vyvanse generic prescriptions I get right now, I'm losing $400 a prescription if I choose to take care of my patients.
So you're losing hundreds of dollars when you service your patients?
Yeah.
All right, coming up, my next guest says during the pandemic, the U.S. Department of Defense gave his company $96 million to make personal protective equipment for American healthcare workers. It's been 3 years, and he says he's got absolutely nothing to show for it. But yet he got $96 million, so what went wrong? We're going to talk to him next. I want to reiterate tonight that we're talking about the Chinese government, not the Chinese people. I want to bring two more voices into this conversation. Dan Izaki is a founding member of the American Medical Manufacturers Association and CEO of the United States Technology. He says, as someone who manufactures PPE, this is personal protection equipment, right here in the U.S., he feels the U.S. government has abandoned him for China. And Peter Mattis is the president of Jamestown Foundation and has written and spoken extensively about the Chinese government and Chinese Communist Party. You got $96 million from the government, but that's a drop in the bucket when you're trying to compete with China, where they're paying 47 cents an hour for labor, right?
Absolutely.
How do you compete with that?
So it's a great question. I'll compete with anyone, right? Based on skill, based on technology, based on innovation. But when you're competing against a national power that has the ability to subsidize, control, and make their businesses more competitive globally than we are, it's really not a fair fight, right? The goal is to dominate, and when we're basically looking at it from the perspective of, we're, for-profit businesses, we work off of innovation, American ingenuity, and grit and spirit. But the reality is, how can you compete when I have to pay my workers, $48,000 to $52,000 a year for a warehouse, employee versus someone who's making pennies in China? If it's not slave labor, by the way, that's a possibility too.
So, Peter, what is the goal of the Chinese Communist Party in all of this?
The Chinese Communist Party has been consistent for the last 100 years to take China back onto the world stage as a great power, to lead the world, and they decide what's important, and that the world will sort of funnel through Beijing rather than through the ways in which it's worked now to date.
And the impact, as we're discussing here, is that nobody can compete, and therefore, are we not completely at their mercy?
Well, we still have options. There's production all around the world, and many of those are much friendlier countries and ones that we can deal with. But if we don't change our attitude on this a little bit, we're going to keep seeing these problems. We keep thinking that we're dealing with a market, but there's not a market-based solution. There aren't sort of little incentives you can do when you have coercive tech transfer and intellectual property theft and blocking companies that once they're able to produce domestically in the PRC, that they'll block out foreign companies from selling into that market. It's kind of like preparing for a football game and thinking that more time on the practice field, more time in the gym and preparing is going to get you there and you'll win the game when someone's going to come along while you're in the corridor and crack your knee with a crowbar, right? We have to think about, yes, preparing for the field, but also how do you protect your knee if someone's going to break it?
Yeah, so they're just not playing fair. And is there any way to compensate for that, or do you just have to become independent from China?
You have to start figuring out a way to take the risks down, that when you create alternatives and you create options, it's a lot harder for someone to coerce you and to put pressure on you. Even if Beijing didn't do it deliberately, if a war broke out, all of that shipping going in and out of China is going to stop, even when it's not necessarily a deliberate effort to harm us.
Well, it may not be a deliberate effort to harm us, but the result is still the same. I mean, she still can't get her medication. So what's our government doing about it?
I can tell you, as someone who was working on Capitol Hill during part of COVID time, like, one of the problems from government is just knowing what is going on. And even companies don't know what is going on sort of 2 and 3 tiers down in their supply chains.
Now, maybe the Department of Defense knows where the bullets and the missiles are, but in terms of the medical supply chain, there was no information. So when the White House put together the Joint Acquisition Task Force, they started to try and figure out, what do we have and what do we need? And it was shocking that that information didn't exist. And I know that, today HHS has a program where they're trying to invest and put all that data together, but that requires a lot of partnerships between government and business and bringing that all together. And hopefully they're working on it.
Sounds to me like we got a bunch of people having a meeting, to plan a meeting, to create a committee, to have another meeting.
Absolutely.
And in the meantime, she can't get her medication.
Absolutely.
He can't get what he needs for his patients. Nobody's doing anything about it.
Absolutely correct.
Somebody needs to put verbs in their sentences and start doing something.
Thank you for having the show and sort of raising this issue, because once I think people understand how desperate the situation is, maybe that will cause our lawmakers to be more involved and more incentivized to make the changes that are required. Because we do have a path forward. We can manufacture stuff in America. If we're allowed to compete fairly, we'll crush. It's not a problem. All day long, we'll compete. But if you're competing against someone that's got a 100-year time horizon who wants, global dominance, and, we're not responding to them in the same ways, then we can't. And we'll never have an industry here.
What do you think needs to happen?
One, if we want to protect industry, we have to actually, as much as we don't want to think about tariffs and other forms, we actually have to block off what's there. One of the reasons why we have SpaceX is because we blocked China out of the commercial space industry, and we did it decades ago because of how closely linked it is to the military. We created a space for someone like Elon Musk to come and mobilize resources and gather people together and to see a market and to go forth. And now they're chasing us. The Chinese have a number of commercial space companies trying to catch up. If we want to review investments like this is a place where our government is actually overwhelmed with the amount of screening that they have to do for visas for companies investing, that we don't have enough China expertise across our government to actually clear off some of these things. One of the departments that's responsible for looking at whether or not a company is using Uyghur forced labor, where they're moving Uyghurs out of the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region out to factories on the East Coast, they don't even have people with Chinese language skills to do the research. They're using Google Translate to try to do some of this research. And I can tell you, having done some desk research like that, you can't do it without Chinese. If you don't know it, you can't do it. So in some sense, it's about building our entire competence for dealing with China, not just at a place like the State Department or the Defense Department where we think it's normal, but in places like HHS, in Treasury, in Commerce, and Department of Homeland Security. Because many of these problems are too big to give it to just one person and say, okay, here's your part, here's your part. No one can do the whole thing by themselves.
Well, maybe we don't need 86,000 more IRS agents to harass the population. Maybe let's hire those people to protect the country from our foreign adversaries instead. It's shocking to me that we're the only ones talking about this. That's why I launched this network, to talk about things that other people were either afraid to talk about or didn't have interest in talking about. This affects every one of you, me, every one of you at home. You get sick and can't get the medications that you need, which is the case right now for a whole lot of people. That's a problem. So this is a call to action. Let's do something with this. Join the Merritt Street Army here and let's start making some noise. there's one show I especially want you to check out. Morning on Merritt Street is hands down the best way to start your day. It's packed with news and entertainment, and most importantly, unique and fascinating ways to improve your life. And it's also a ton of fun. Join Dominique and Fanchon every morning at 8, 7 Central on Mornings on Merritt Street, wherever you watch. And of course, you can always watch for free on Merit Plus app. Just go to the Apple Store or Google Play and you can download it for free. I want to thank all of my guests for being here tonight. My new book, We've Got Issues, How Americans Can Stand Strong for This Country's Soul and Sanity, is on sale everywhere books are sold right now, and it talks about this very thing. If you don't have a copy, you should get one. For more information about tonight's show, log on to drphil.com. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.